All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Lanae Erickson, and I'm an SVP at Third Way, and I'm excited to be here with you today. We are in the home stretch of this campaign, and of course, you, like I, am staring into our crystal balls, trying to divine what exactly is going to happen in November. But lucky for us, we've got someone with us today who I think her crystal ball is one of the sharpest and clearest in Democratic politics. So Celinda Lake is an absolute powerhouse. She is currently advising the Biden campaign, but she is here in her capacity just as one of the smartest women in politics. And her cutting edge research has been deployed to win some of the toughest races and to move opinion on some of the toughest issues in American politics. In fact, she was recently called arguably the most influential woman in her field. And I 100% concur with that characterization. So Celinda, thanks so much for joining us today, and let's dive right in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And coming from you, that's a real honor because I admire so much your analysis.
Well, tell us what's going to happen. Look out, 7 weeks, ask us this crystal ball, relieve my anxiety. Americans are going to the polls 7 weeks from today. And hopefully they'll have already mostly returned their ballots before then. Maybe they won't actually be physically going, but there's so much on the line. Can you just start by giving us a sense of the state of the race right now in what you see?
Sure. So what we see is a race where Joe Biden is in the lead, and it's had a pretty steady lead for quite some time. That Donald Trump has a net negative job performance rating, and that's a tough place for an incumbent to be. And his numbers, he really has a hard time getting above 43, 45% in favor, who have a positive job performance on him. He's also not personally very well liked, but I think in the end, while he tries to make his style an advantage, you see him, carrying a very negative job performance rating, and that is a problem. And then you see a huge gender gap in the data. And of course, I know this is a mutual passion of ours, but this is a case where women really have taken a personal style that they never were that fond of, see it now as a governing style, and are very negative about this as a governing style, and see him as chaotic, divisive, using violence and division as political strategies, egotistical, not listening to experts, not having a plan. And that is just a governing style that they think doesn't fit this time. And even people who thought that he was a businessman, so you couldn't expect certain things from him, and that he would get the economy roaring, think he may not have the right set of skills to get the economy rolling in a COVID economic environment.
Yeah. So obviously a lot of folks have been focused on suburban women in 2018, and now seeing if their blue wave from 2018 can help propel us to a win in 2020. What do you think is going on in the heads of that voting bloc? Elaborate maybe a little bit on what you were starting to talk about, and what do other people get wrong when they assume they understand what's going on with suburban women?
Well, first of all, and you all were some of the people who really lifted this up, these are not your grandmother's suburbs anymore. So one of the things that people really get wrong about the suburbs, including men and women, is how diverse they are, and that there is a lot of base vote in the suburbs anymore. And of course, we have to go no closer than Prince George's County here, for example, or Fairfax, Virginia, to see that. So that's a very important factor that people don't get. But Donald Trump did a Hail Mary, and it was Mary indeed that he was aiming for, which is law and order, violence and protest, and defund the police agenda. And with a couple of exceptions, it's really failed. And it really failed to catch women. And women have been much more thoughtful about this. They are not for defunding the police, but they also realize that defunding the police usually means reprioritizing spending, including training, including mental health, including new equipment and different kinds of things like that that are very important to them. And most people assume that Joe Biden is not for defunding the police, and he's been very clear about that. The latest protests, people believe overwhelmingly that the press is really contributing to an image of these as violent protests, and for the most part, the protests are peaceful. People are making important points, and in most states, they still prioritize racial justice and criminal justice over violence in terms of which is the more important issue. So this law and order strategy failed, and it failed in suburban women and suburban voters in general. And that was a major, major play that the Trump campaign made. And it's really, I find it quite rewarding to see that America is really pretty united around this agenda. And it's a different era. It's not 1968 anymore.
Yeah, if there's any example of that in my recent life, my mother, who's a swing voter in my home state of Minnesota, texted me so excited because the governor signed police reform legislation. And I hadn't even been talking to her about it. She texted me to say, did you see this? It's so great. So if that's any example, clearly Trump is not appealing to her.
Yeah. And seniors were a big target of that effort, actually. And one of the things that's part of the secret of the Biden formulation is doing better with seniors than we have done since 2008. And I think it's not accidental that, of course, Trump launched today a major media push saying that Biden was for cutting Social Security, when indeed it's his tax plan, Trump's tax plan, that jeopardizes Social Security. And Biden has been very forthright about being for expanding Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, obviously it's so important that Democrats win the White House this year, but a Biden administration will look very different depending on control of the House and Senate, and that will really determine a lot of what's able to get done if we do oust Donald Trump. How do you think all of this is accruing to other Republicans? A lot of the things you've talked about that suburban women are reacting to are really about Donald Trump and who he is and what he continues to do. What does that mean for how they or others in their communities might vote down ballot?
Yeah, isn't that a really fascinating question? And, you know, in 2018, because they couldn't get at Donald Trump, they voted for the Democrats. These suburban women voted very Democratic. They also loved the women candidates that were running on the Democratic side, and the Republican Party had not done a good job of recruiting women, and then their women have a very tough time surviving their primaries. So it was a perfect storm, particularly for suburban women. Now they're more up in the air because they can get directly at Donald Trump and express their opinion. But many of these Republicans, and it'll be interesting if the final analysis is they really needed to do this, but many of the Republicans, abjectly terrified about the Trump people taking them on in their primaries, went pretty pro-Trump, even when they had some questions about what he was doing and how it fit their state. And so now they're between a rock and a hard place. And it's put in play a number of Senate races that normally would not be in play. And then the Democrats, I think, had superb recruitment efforts and just really got tremendous, tremendous candidates. And there are a lot of Senate seats in play and a lot of House seats that we're still trying to gain or hold on to.
Are there any that spring to mind that you think the DC crowd isn't paying quite enough attention to with their call time or their pocketbooks?
Well, I think that the DC crowd actually has done a really good job. But two of my favorites, of course, women, are Elise Galvin in Alaska and Kathleen Williams in Montana. Both of them running a second time around, very seasoned politicians, raised very good money. And one of the things I think that is different that people may not expect, Donald Trump is not, he's going to win Montana and Alaska, but it's going to be a lot closer than people realize because both of those states are mad at Trump. And so that's hurting the incumbent Congress people, or that in the open seat in Montana, a candidate who's kind of close to Trump. So those are two sleepers to pay extra attention to.
So when I watched the Democratic convention, the thing that really struck me was just how big our tent is. And,
Mm.
our tent is always bigger than the Republican tent in terms of uh, interests and visuals and all kinds of other ways. But it's especially huge right now, from, Bernie Sanders and AOC to John Kasich. So how are you advising folks, and what do you think is the best advice for holding together such a broad coalition, either for future elections or while we're governing, as we know that, the other side is going to try to pull it apart and really pit it against each other?
Well, I think we've already tried to do that, and it's been pretty unsuccessful. And I think Bernie Sanders, AOC, who's our client, I mean, we work for Joe Biden and AOC, and we're proud of both. And I think that's the tale of the future of our party. And I think Donald Trump did for us what we could never do for ourselves, which is to really bring us together and really discipline us. And people have been very focused with their eye on the prize. And when Joe Biden started this campaign, and I think he will end this campaign, that what's really on the ballot is the soul of the nation. There's no question that Democrats across the board feel that. And we agree about a lot of things. And then I think there will be lots of policies that we'll be surprised that we're in agreement on. Joe Biden, very strong on climate change, made a very strong statement yesterday on the forest fires, and moving in a lot of directions that people may not have expected. And I think there's a long trajectory here where there will be a lot of policies influenced by a lot of different people in our party, but they'll all be better than Donald Trump's.
So I know that there's been a lot of talk about Latino voters in the last week or so, concerns that Democrats haven't done what they need to make the case there, concerns that even though Donald Trump is racist and anti-immigrant, that somehow he's still carrying a certain part of the Latino vote. What's your sense of Democrats and Biden's standing with Latino voters, and what do you think they should be doing to close the deal?
Well, first of all, on Latino voters, maybe more so than other voters, there's an awful lot of bad polling out there. And the Florida polls some of them are just horrific because they don't have any Spanish speaking Latinos in them, for example, many of the public polls. And of course, Matt Barretto from Latino Decision Makers is working with the campaign, and Josh Ulibarri from our firm, working with a lot of the IEs, and I know has worked with you, and they're very, very precise about their polling. That said, Latinas are really on board, and there's a huge gender gap in the Latino community. Latinx men who have lagged behind, previously for Democrats, we're working very, very hard on. And I think that Joe Biden is demonstrating strength and resolve and compassion. Those are important values. His faith is important in the Latino community. The price of the Latino community has paid for COVID missteps is just horrendous. And I think Latinas, the last straw for them was when Trump's lack of listening to experts and lack of a plan endangered their kids going back to school. And a lot of Latinos, their children are in more crowded classrooms and classrooms with less equipment, and you do not endanger your children to any mom in America. That's it. And that was really it for Latinas. For Latinos, I think we still need to draw the economic plan out. We still need to talk about when this economy cannot get going again unless we listen to the experts on COVID, and to show strength, the kind of strength that Joe Biden showed in the convention and in subsequent speeches. So it is an effort. It is a lot of focus. There's a lot of communication, and people take very, very seriously the Latino vote and working very, very hard for it. That said, there's also an awful lot of bad polling out there. So beware, ask some questions about the polls.
And I will just do a quick follow-up because it looks like folks in the audience are already weighing in the Q&A. I will invite all of you, type in the chat if you have questions for Celinda, and I will pose to her as many as we can get to. There's a specific follow-up about Cuban Americans and Florida Latino voters and being wary of socialism. Is there something specific that can be done to make inroads with those communities who might have a different viewpoint of what that word means that Donald Trump so often likes to throw at anyone on the other side?
Well, Cuban Americans have been Republican to begin with, and there's a generational effect there. But there, Cuban. This is not any different than what we've seen before. The Florida Latino population is unbelievably diverse. And there are certainly some Central American and non-Cuban Latino population, Latin American, who are anti-socialism and anti-Maduro, et cetera. But I think the secret sauce in Florida is the Puerto Rican vote. And the number of Puerto Ricans who are there. Very often when Puerto Ricans come from the island of Florida, they have a couple of years where they don't vote that much, but I think that Donald Trump has been so outrageous to the community, so disrespectful, so outrageous to Puerto Rico, that you're going to see the potential for a really strong vote there. And I think that's part of the secret sauce. And the Puerto Rican community is now as big or bigger than the Cuban American community.
Yeah. Another question from the audience: how well has polling adjusted since 2016? And should we be reading 2020 polls differently?
Well, I think it's adjusted quite well. First of all, the private polls were not off as much as some of the public polls. And the state polls were off more than the national polls were, even in 2016. But all of us are doing, and many of us were before, text to online, cell, and landlines. All of us are doing high and low turnout models. And in fact, one of the biggest questions now is who's going to vote and whose vote's going to be counted. And so that is something that is one of the biggest variables at this point in how people are going to vote. But we've taken that into consideration. And none of us relies on one poll. We rely on averages of the polls. And I really recommend that as well. And then 538, I think, has been doing some really great analysis on the methodology in different polls and making that black box more transparent to everyone. And I know all of us are trying very, very hard to watch the level of education, including Spanish speaking on the Latino vote, etc. So everyone is paying a lot more attention to that, I think. And again, I think the private polls were less off than the public polls, even in 2016.
But we can all agree that not all polls are created equal.
That we can.
So obviously people have been really focused on young voters. They turned out in the midterms at record levels, but they're going to be super important to deciding these key states that were decided by such a small margin last time around. What are you seeing from some of the candidates you're working with that you think is working to energize young voters to come out and vote?
Well, running young candidates works. So lifting up young candidates definitely works. Talking about climate change, talking about racial justice. These are two issues very, very important to young people. Understanding that young people are not monolithic. There's a big gender gap even among young people. There are big racial gaps. There's a big age gap. The under 30s are quite different than the 30 to 39-year-olds. And the 30 to 39-year-olds really struggling with the fact that they cannot get a decent start, that they have been hit by the 2008 recession, high student debt, and now COVID, and it's impacted their jobs, their ability to own a home, their ability to pay off their debts, etc. So this is a very hard hit cohort. And the messages you might send to an under 30 different than the messages you might send to a 30 to 39-year-old. One thing that's quite consistent is that they're all pretty anti-Trump. And we need to remember that in 2016, Trump actually split white millennials.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but that's not happening now. And so the key here is the enthusiasm question, talking to young people, talking to them about what matters to them, getting the surrogates out there. The VP Harris was a big plus for young voters. They're very, very enthusiastic about her nomination. And they're very enthusiastic about Joe Biden's plans, but they don't know them that well.
So I've got a lot of questions here in the chat, and quite a few of them are about the debates. We've got the conventions are now behind us. This is the kind of next big thing, facing off Joe Biden, tete-a-tete with Donald Trump. What is the strategy going into the debates, especially given that Biden is, as you said, doing quite well in the polls and needs to just prevent slippage as opposed to kind of change the dynamics of the race?
Yeah, I mean, our goal right now is to solidify our soft support. I think that the debates are a great opportunity for us, because I think it's going to put to rest the strength dynamic, put to rest the dynamic about quote unquote mental fitness that they're running in social media all the time. And I think that, Joe Biden, you can have any conversation with Joe Biden where he doesn't come across as someone who really knows what he's talking about and really knows that job. And I think that will be very, very reassuring to voters. And you'll see for the first time this leadership contrast, which I personally believe is one of the key elements to winning this race, right there in front of you. You're going to see the two. Now, Donald Trump is a formidable debater. Ironically, in the polls, voters think he's going to win the debates. And that's a good position for us, I think. But I think it's a real opportunity to lift up, for voters to get to know a little bit better Joe Biden, and for voters to get to see these two leaders in very stark contrast.
So Florida obviously has been the bane of so many people's existence in terms of electoral college and, counting votes and basic things like that in the past. But it could be the absolute decider this time around. I mean, if Trump loses Florida, it's virtually impossible for him to stay in the White House. What do you think the prospects are in Florida right now? And how does Biden really put that one in the win category so that we can not have to worry about slow counting in other states?
Well, you might have to worry about slow counting states, but the good news for Biden is there are a lot of formulas to the 270 votes that don't include Florida. So we have multiple pathways to victory. And I think the campaign and Jen O'Malley Dillon have done a brilliant job of maintaining a focus on a series of pathways. So we have several routes to victory, and that's very important. I do agree with you that it's very hard for Donald Trump to put it together if he doesn't win Florida. I think Florida is too close to call. We're up in the polls a couple of points, but very, very volatile place. And as you say, a lot of boats have been breached on the shores of Florida. So there's a lot of tears shed over Florida. But it's a very diverse state. And if we can get our vote out, we should do quite well there. But it's also like winning Florida is like winning Western Europe. You have to win England and France and Germany and Spain. And they're also different. And it's a lot of media markets. So there's a lot that they're doing in Florida, and a lot that needs, to be done.
So I've heard quite a few people ask me about the hidden Trump vote, that, maybe we can't believe these polls because people are lying, or there's just people not answering them, and actually that Trump has some folks out there that aren't being counted that are in his camp. What's your viewpoint on the hidden Trump vote from kind of 16 to now? Is that something that we should be worried about and kind of calculating in when we see these polls?
So the pollsters are legitimately divided on this question. We as a firm, I believe in the hidden Trump vote. I think we actually documented it after 2016. But then I'm a Montanan, so I believe in conspiracies. But one of the things that's interesting is that the Republican convention really diminished the hidden Trump vote because it emboldened Trump voters, and they were quite successful in emboldening their base. So when we went back out into the field for all of our clients, we found very little hidden Trump vote because the Trump voters were pretty self-confident about their vote. Now, they also have a very, very aggressive turnout program in places of lower income non-college whites, people that maybe have been ignored in the past, people living in trailer parks and things like that, lower income struggling families. And So that isn't really a hidden vote, but they have their surge and we have our surge in turnout. And it's a real battle. Both sides are emphasizing that, and they have new voters that they can get out just like we do.
Well, I know you have to go very soon to a very important phone call, so I will just ask you a couple more questions, and if anyone has any others, get them into the Q&A very quickly. But one thing that I've been curious about is, what do you think the biggest lesson is we have learned from 2016 that we are now applying and doing better, and could credit with a win in 2020?
Don't overshoot your skis. Don't spread yourself too thin. Focus on, get your multiple paths to victory and stay focused on them. Don't get seduced into going to places and ignoring your base or ignoring the true swing states. I really, really admire the Biden campaign. I think it's been extraordinarily disciplined in that regard, and really set up really good state organizations and not being deflected from its course, and pick the right 6 swing states, because now we're back down to the same 6 swing states. So I think that's been really a strong lesson out of 2016. I think that the Biden campaign has done a very, very good job also, and it's easier when you're running against incumbent Trump than candidate Trump. But they did a very good job of defining what this race was about, leadership, and be even on the economy and win on character and leadership. And I think they've executed that very, very strongly, and had very powerful emotional ads that have really stayed on that track, even as they've done different issues and utilized different moments. And then I think it isn't so much a comparison to 2016, but who could have imagined this year? And I think this campaign has been just remarkable in its adaptiveness to extraordinary and unprecedented circumstances, and yet keeping its eye on the prize. So it's been really, really good in that regard, I think.
So on that note, my last question from an audience member is, should we really worry about mail-in ballots versus voting in person? And if you had to recommend what they should do, should they go vote early or should they mail in their ballot?
Well, you can do both, right? You can mail in your ballot early.
There you go.
There's a good one. I think it's really good for voters to get their votes in early. That's the most important thing. And I think that we will be able to rely on the votes, and the campaign's going to make sure you can rely on the vote by mail, but also safely vote in person. And what's good is to give voters lots of choices, but I think and encourage voters to vote early.
Great. Well, that seems like the perfect place to stop. I know you have to go on and win a bunch of elections. So good luck, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your audience, and thank you for your good questions.
Talk to you soon.